Camellia sat in a wicker chair, gently rocking back and forth as the rhythmic creaking filled the quiet room. She glanced over at Michaela, who lay in bed with the book propped up in her lap, her body still resting from the pain she had endured. A relaxed sigh escaped Camellia's lips as she stood up, the chair creaking softly beneath her weight. She made her way over to the nearby window, drawing back the curtains to let in the morning light. The outside was calm, almost halcyonic, with the previous deterioration of the world completely disappeared. The grass outside was a vibrant spring green, dotted with prairie wildflowers and errant dandelions. Camellia stretched, feeling the tension ease from her muscles, before walking towards the exit of the nurse's room, yawning slightly as she went. Michaela looked up from her book, raising an eyebrow. Where are you going? Just making some coffee. Does our host even have coffee? I don't know. I think Lucian brought some with him, knowing how much we enjoy it. I'll go ask. She walked over to Lucian's door, before hesitating. Camellia then knocked on the door quietly. Lucian? The silence that followed was almost palpable, the only sound being the faint creak of the old house settling around them. She waited, her heart beating a little faster, unsure if Lucian would respond. The moment stretched, and she knocked again, slightly louder this time. Lucian, are you awake? There was no response. She frowned, looking down in disappointment. Camellia let out an exasperated sigh and walked out of the nurse's room. She entered the kitchen, where the morning sun beat down on her face, casting warm, golden light across the wood and stone countertops. The kitchen was empty and quiet. She looked around, feeling a bit lost. She could probably ask Tobias what to do, but he wasn't anywhere to be seen. Peering down the hallway, she noticed that the door to his room was slightly ajar. Camellia walked closer and gently pushed the door open a bit more. Inside, Tobias lay curled up in a ratty blanket, his breathing deep and even in sleep. She hesitated, feeling a pang of sympathy for him. Not wanting to startle him, she quietly closed the door before knocking. Tobias, I just wanted to know if you'd like some coffee. She heard the sound of shuffling linen and rustles as a soft groan came from the room.
What's a coffee?
Camellia sighed, putting her head in her hand. Seriously? She motioned vaguely, trying to find a way to describe the beverage. Okay, it's a drink that wakes you up in the morning, kinda bitter, tastes better with sugar? She heard a thud as Tobias stumbled out of bed. The woman winced at the sound. Ouch! There were a slew of quiet scrambling noises before the door shakingly opened, Tobias's tousled hair barely visible through the crack. He peeked his head out and looked down at her, appearing slightly more rested than he had yesterday.
I'm listening.
At this rate, I might not even have to make the coffee with how quickly that woke you up. Tobias glared down at her, beginning to shut the door. Wait, I didn't mean to be rude. I was just teasing. The man paused, his hand still on the door. He studied her for a moment, then sighed sheepishly, pushing the door open again.
Oh, I didn't realize.
There was a moment of silence as Camellia studied his expression. Then he uncomfortably shuffled down the hall. She followed him, gently closing the door to his room behind her. Tobias reached the kitchen and sat at the table, twiddling his thumbs as his gaze drifted around the room, as if he weren't used to being inside it.
So, how do you make this coffee?
Do you have a percolator?
Perco.
So you don't. Got it. She instead sets up a makeshift drip, stuffing a cloth into a funnel, then starts boiling water over the hearth. She crosses her arms, occasionally glancing at Tobias, who seemed uncomfortable. His gaze was firmly fixed away from her, as if her mere presence made him uneasy. He tugged at the hemp bracelet around his wrist, fraying and unfraying the threads. You don't have to be so nervous, you know. The coffee won't bite.
Not afraid of the coffee.
She looked at him with pursed lips, letting out a breath. I don't bite either. Well, I don't bite people who don't deserve it.
That's reassuring, I suppose. I'm just not used to this. Having people around. It's unexpected.
She gave him a small, encouraging smile, hoping to ease the tension. Well, you'll get used to it. People and coffee, probably. I know I definitely had to do some things I wasn't used to. Like going on a week-long journey.
You must really love your mother. To go this far, I mean. I imagine you're not from anywhere close.
Camellia settled back on the edge of the counter, fiddling with the edges of her ribbon absent-mindedly as she thought about her family. She taught me everything. I'm a much better person today because of her, I think. And as for where I'm from, Roslyn, country of flowers in the sea.
Maybe someone mentioned it to me once, but I can't say I'm familiar. Flowers, that I can understand.
Amelia turned to him, curious now.
They're also fairly important to Calphosian culture. We... those who inhabit it here were very fond of the meanings behind them.
Camellia smiled at him softly. What's your favorite flower?
Oh, I'm partial to camellias.
There was a brief pause, filled with an awkward silence. Camellia shifted uncomfortably, feeling her cheeks flush with a hint of embarrassment. Like, seriously?
Yes? They grow outside on the hills. I found myself growing attached. What's so funny?
No, there's nothing funny. I just like them a lot too. He smiled at her slightly, stopping his fidgeting for a moment. Then they're interrupted, as Lucian walked out, putting his bag on the table roughly.
Michaela said you needed coffee.
Good morning to you too, Grumpy. Lucian sat down across from Tobias, who goes back to frowning, scooting slightly back. Camellia glanced over at him, then took the ground coffee beans out of the bag, putting them into the filter. Her brother looked at her, then back at Tobias, coughing slightly.
So, you lived here all by yourself?
No.
Oh, that's right. You had key. Blanche and Umber too.
Camellia paused, holding the pot over the filter. She glanced back at Tobias, noticing his tense demeanor. Lucian, about to respond, caught his sister's look of warning.
Yes, I forgot.
Camellia let out a sigh of relief before continuing to pour the coffee. She prepared more mugs, listening to them as they talked.
I overheard you have a garden? They're wildflowers. Oh, so you don't cultivate them? Don't need to. Clearly, you need something. Out with it. No, I just wanted to get to know you. Did you? Because it...
Okay! Coffee is almost ready. Tobias, do you have any milk or cream? A pitcher of milk appeared on the counter as Tobias glared at Lucian. Camellia jumped with surprise, then quickly composed herself and grabbed the pitcher. The silence in the kitchen thickened, punctuated only by the faint steaming of the coffee. Thanks, I guess. Lucian, can you go tell Michaela coffee is almost done? Lucian rolled his eyes and left for the nurse's room, the door closing with a soft click behind him. Tobias visibly relaxed, shoulders slumping slightly as he let out a sigh of relief, tension releasing from his muscles.
Sorry, it's just all those questions.
I was asking questions too. Do you have a problem with my brother or something? Tobias let out a sharp breath, then waves his hands dismissively as he shakes his head.
No, I promise I don't.
The man hunched further into himself, pulling his legs close.
I'm just not used to all this attention. And I'm very, very exhausted.
Camellia raised an eyebrow, puffing her bangs out of her face. She then pours the cream over the coffee brew, the liquid turning a light brown. She handed it to him with an insistent smile. "Try this. It might help." With a glance of suspicion, he took it from her, before bending down to sniff it. "You don't drink with your nose."
I know that. I'm just making sure it's not, you know.
Here, give it to me. She sipped it quickly, then gave it back. "See? It's fine. Now drink." He looked up at her, hesitant, before taking a sip. Immediately, he sputtered and covered his mouth.
It's so bitter!
And Camellia gave him a cheeky grin and took the cup from his hands. "Now I know you have a sweet tooth." He glowered at her as she scanned his kitchen, spotting a bag of cane sugar on the counter with a wooden spoon inside. Camellia grabbed the spoon, adding 2 bits of sugar into his coffee, and stirred it before handing it back to him. "Here." He cautiously took another sip, still eyeing her warily. Then the man looked back at the coffee and set it down with wide eyes. "Tastes good, doesn't it?"
It's not bad, I guess.
"And that's why Rosalinian coffee is the best." She then made the rest of the coffee, preparing 3 more cups for Michaela, Lucian, and herself. Carrying the mugs, she walked back into the nurse's room, leaving Tobias in the kitchen drinking down his own. Inside, she saw Michaela talking to Key, whose eyes were downcast as he frowned. "Where's Lucian? I thought he would be with you." Michaela looked up at Camellia with worry, but Key quickly spoke up.
I tried apologizing to him for last night, but he got really frustrated with me. He went into his room and didn't say anything else.
Camellia looks at Michaela to get confirmation.
It's true. I don't know what he's so upset about, but I haven't seen him like this since.
The woman trails off, looking down. Camellia frowned, setting down her and Michaela's mug. "I understand. I'll check on him." She walked up to Lucian's door and knocked gently. "Luca? Luca?"
I don't want to talk right now.
"Well, if you don't want to talk, can I at least put this coffee outside your door?" There was a shuffle as Lucian came to the door, opening it slightly. He took the coffee from her, muttering a small thank you before shutting the door behind him. Camellia sighed and turned back to Key, who was looking at the floor, clearly distressed.
It's my fault.
"It's not," she sighed, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "Lucian just was really excited to meet him. I think he just needs a bit to get used to how things are right now."
Yes, but
She bit her lip, then forced on a smile for him. "You should stop worrying about him and instead talk to Tobias. I'm sure he missed you." Key nodded slowly, still looking dejected. He then looked up, a shaky smile on his face as he awkwardly scratched the back of his neck.
You're right. Maybe I'll take you and Michaela out too. I'll show you all the spots Tobias and I used to hang out at.
"Oh, yeah, your brother mentioned a camellia field. I'd like to see that." She glanced over at Michaela, who was staring out the window, deep in thought. "Are you all rested up?" Michaela looked up at her, then nodded softly, rubbing her shoulder with a wince.
"Yeah, I'm all right. Just a bit sore."
Camellia walked to her and helped her up. The 3 of them entered the kitchen, where Tobias was still drinking his coffee. He looked up at them, creasing his brows with concern.
I thought you all were going to drink your coffee.
Camellia gave him a smile. "We might go outside and drink it." Tobias gave her a look of disappointment, looking at his lap.
Oh, okay. Have fun.
"Do you want to walk with us?" He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, still sipping the drink. He glanced up at Camellia several times, as if he were hesitant on how to respond. "You don't have to."
No, I'll go. It's probably fine."
He staggered to his feet, grabbing his own cup, and stood next to them awkwardly. Michaela gave him a thoughtful look, eyes lowering to his chest, where 2 necklaces lay firmly against his heart. a silver wire with a key hanging off of it, and hemp rope with an obsidian pendant, nearly identical to Key's. He slowly tucked them into his shirt, looking the group over.
Did you have any place in mind?
Camellia wanted to see the garden. Oh, and I also wanted to show her the fish pond too, if that's okay.
Tobias nodded and grabbed a large, weathered cloak from a nearby hook. He swung it over his shoulders, the fabric swishing as it settled around him, obscuring his form.
Isn't it too hot for that? Doesn't matter. Let's go.
Tobias hesitated for a moment, lingering by the door. His eyes followed the group as they stepped outside. After a brief pause, he followed, pulling the cowl of his cloak further over his face as the sunlight shone in his eyes. He winced, shielding his eyes from the brightness. Camellia had seen it previously when she'd looked outside before, but it was astounding what a stark contrast it was. The rose vines that had once ravaged the path had receded back into the depths, leaving no trace of their presence. The fissures and signs of chaos had vanished, as if by magic. Tobias cast uneasy glances around, his discomfort evident as Key strode confidently ahead, leading the way. They took a narrow footpath, the grass worn down by countless steps over the years.
So, I was actually the one who found this place. I'd been keeping all the flowers healthy.
In response to this, Tobias pulled his cloak tighter around himself, his face partially hidden in its shadows. Camellia glanced back at him with suspicion.
I wasn't really good at it, though, so Tobias helped me a little.
Yeah.
Michaela remained silent, her eyes darting around with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She lingered behind the group, examining every detail of the scenery with a scrutinizing gaze. Noticing how distracted she was, Camellia spoke up.
You know, Mika has a garden back at home. Maybe she could give you some pointers.
Michaela jolted, flicking her gaze forward.
Yeah. I'd always be happy to help you, Key.
Key smiled at her, though his expression seemed subdued.
It's okay. You've already helped me a lot, and I wouldn't want to...
Shit.
The three of them turned to Tobias, their attention drawn by his muttered curse. Upon seeing his sorrowful face, they followed his gaze. The garden lay before them, completely overrun as if it hadn't been pruned or tended to in years. Tobias stood there, looking almost ashamed, as Key's smile faded.
Key, I'm sorry. I didn't want to touch it while you were...
He trailed off, unable to meet Key's eyes. The young boy slowly walked toward the garden, kneeling down to inspect a flower closely. His eyes widened, and he quickly straightened up, almost as if trying to conceal exactly what he saw. The boy whipped around, waving his hands dismissively at his brother's concern.
It's okay. I wasn't here for a few years, right?
Tobias looked down, wincing. Key smiled nervously, letting out a quiet laugh as he looked at his brother.
It was just a few years, right?
Tobias simply turned away, his face a mix of emotions difficult to decipher.
It's not important. How long have you been alone? Do I really need to repeat myself? It's not important.
He scowled at Michaela, then turned away.
Moreover, it's none of your business. I got by without him here.
Camellia glanced over at him, noticing the faint glow of the gold ring in his eyes. Quickly, he pulled the hood of his cloak further over his face.
Let's go. This is supposed to be a tour, not an interrogation.
He skulked ahead, ignoring them as he hunched forward. Camelia's shoulders slacked, unsure if she should follow behind. Michaela lingered next to Key as he plucked a flower, a white and gold rose, and watched as he hurried after his brother. Camellia moved to follow, but Michaela grabbed her arm firmly.
Wait, I need to talk to you about something.
Camellia looked back at her with curiosity, slowing her pace to a halt.
Don't you think it's a little bit strange that this place is completely clear of disrepair? Minus the neglect, it's almost idyllic compared to Cosfield and Hillam.
Camellia furrowed her brows at this. Are you saying we should be suspicious of Tobias?
Well, I'm not saying he's bad, but I am saying there might be more we don't know about.
How can you tell? I'm not disagreeing with you, but...
Well, it's simply an observation.
Yeah, but your observation goes past the point of mere intuition. In my opinion, Tobias is no more suspicious than you. Camellia's arm fell to her side, leaving Michaela's grip. Knowing about a cellar I didn't even notice. Navigating through a maze effortlessly. Heck, even knowing about a cave that only Key knew of. You're not hiding something from me, are you?
Camellia, you wouldn't understand.
Well, I want to. Please. It's bad enough that Lucian isn't telling me what's going on, but now you too? Michaela hesitated, avoiding her gaze. Turtle Dove, you know I'll accept you no matter what. I don't care what you've gotten yourself involved with.
Camellia, I can't. I'm sorry.
Michaela stepped back, retreating towards the cottage.
I'm going to go check on Lucian.
Mika!
Please, don't follow me.
Camellia watched silently as Michaela walked away, then sighed deeply, looking down at her shoes. She turned and caught up with the two brothers. Tobias and Key sat on a dock by a lake, tossing breadcrumbs into the water. Catfish swam up eagerly, gobbling up the morsels. Key glanced up at Camellia, confusion flickering in his eyes, about to ask where Michaela was. However, seeing Camelia's solemn expression, he closed his mouth. She managed a sad smile at him before sitting down beside Tobias. He had pulled his hood off, letting his hair cascade down his back in disarray.
Looks like Ron was hungry.
Camellia followed Tobias's gaze to a brown catfish who was voraciously devouring the breadcrumbs. Tobias hugged his knees close to his chest, lost in thought.
More here. Now, I have no idea what to do with them.
Oh! Maybe we could name them, like old times. I already told Camellia we needed new names.
He pointed at a few different fish slowly.
Camellia, Michaela, Lucian.
He then hesitated, seeing forth.
What do you think of the name Calon? I really like it.
Tobias froze, then let out a nervous laugh. Camellia raised an eyebrow, observing him closely.
That's an interesting choice. But maybe we should stick to the ones we usually pick.
The fourth fish swam off. He frowned, watching the catfish's retreating form disappear into the depths of the pond. I have a question, if that's okay. Tobias looked at her curiously. Were you two always together?
A long time ago.
He chuckled softly, tossing another piece of bread into the water.
A long time ago. I was struggling to remember the layout of Kaphos. No matter how many times I traveled, I always seemed to forget the details. So, I made Key. That way, no matter how much I'd forget where I am, he'd know.
You made him from scratch? He glanced at Key, who looked down at his segmented hands with a small frown, his messy ginger hair casting a shadow over his eyes.
Yes, that's true. To be frank, I didn't even intend to. I was just hoping for a guide, someone I could trust.
He opened his mouth as if he were about to retort, then looked away.
Yep, that's what I'm best at.
He stood up, placing his hands on his hips.
And for my next task, I will guide you two back to the house. Alonzai!
He darted off towards the house. Tobias reached his hand out towards him, as if hesitating to let him go, and then let it fall with a shake of his head. Camellia stared at him from across the dock. He really cares about you.
Well, I'm not sure.
If you think that's an idle observation, you've got yourself wrong.
He told me that himself.
Tobias's eyes widened.
He then let out a genuine chuckle, scratching his nose.
You don't mince words, do you? I wish I was similar. I suppose I care about him too. He's my family, even when I have none.
Camellia stood up, her hand extended. The sun beat down on her, casting a radiant glow.
It's time to let him be your family, then. I think it's about time for me, too. Tobias stared up at her, eyes wide with awe. His gaze quickly flicked to the side as he took her hand.
Yeah, that sounds like a hand. A plan. A good plan.
She laughed, helping him up quickly. Let's also get you used to talking while we're at it, amico.
He blushed at the statement, watching her leave with a blank expression, before pulling his cowl back over his head and following in her footsteps.